title, The Last Cabin. It was a late autumn evening when Emily, her boyfriend Tom, and their two friends, Jess and Mark, arrived at the secluded cabin. They had been planning the trip for months, a weekend to unwind, cut off from the world, and reconnect with nature. The drive had taken them deep into the woods, far beyond cell service, and even the narrow dirt road to the cabin had seemed to stretch endlessly through the thickening trees. The cabin itself was old, barely visible from the road as it sat nestled among towering pines. Its wooden exterior, weathered by decades of neglect, seemed to blend into the forest around it. A thin layer of mist clung to the ground, swirling with the light breeze. The air felt colder than it should have for the season, and the overcast sky threatened an early twilight. "This place looks cozy," Jess said, her voice trailing with uncertainty as she grabbed her backpack from the trunk. Tom chuckled and waved her concerns away. "It's perfect. We're completely alone out here, no distractions, just the four of us and nature. Let's just enjoy it." The others agreed, though Emily couldn't shake a strange feeling that had crept over her as soon as they arrived. She chalked it up to the eerie quiet and the isolation. They were miles from any town or other people. She took a deep breath and followed the group inside. The cabin was sparse, simple furniture, a fireplace, and a few hunting trophies mounted on the walls. Dust covered almost everything. The place smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Mark immediately began setting up a fire while the others unpacked and settled in. As night fell, the fire cast flickering shadows across the room, and the mood lightened as they shared stories, laughed, and drank. Emily tried to shake the unease, but the cabin felt unnaturally cold, despite the fire, and every now and then she thought she heard soft creaks from the old wooden floorboards in rooms where no one had gone. "Did you hear that?" Emily asked after one particularly loud creak. "Oh." "Hear what?" Tom replied, turning his head toward the back of the cabin. "That creaking sound, like someone's walking around." Jess snickered. "It's an old cabin, probably the wind or something. These places always make weird noises." Emily nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that it had sounded like footsteps, a slow, deliberate walk, and she decided to drop it and focus on enjoying the night. But the sound came again, louder this time. Creaking floorboards, one after another, moving toward the front of the cabin. Tom stood up and glanced around. "Okay, now I hear it." Mark put down his drink, a frown creasing his face. "Maybe it's just an animal. This place hasn't been used in years. It'd be raccoons or something nesting inside." Tom grabbed a flashlight and walked to the hallway that led to the back rooms. "I'm going to check it out. Probably nothing. But I don't want some animal crawling around while we're trying to sleep." The others waited as Tom disappeared into the hallway, the beam of his flashlight casting strange shadows on the walls. They listened as the creaking continued, growing softer as Tom moved further from the main room. Then, abruptly, the sound stopped. "Tom," Emily called out. "Silence." A moment later they heard a low thud, followed by a strange scraping noise. It was a sound Emily had never heard before, like something heavy being dragged across the wooden floor. Jess sat up, her face pale. "That's not an animal." Emily's stomach tightened. "Tom, what's going on back there?" Still no response. Mark stood up, grabbing a fireplace poker, his jaw tight. "I'm going after him. Stay here." He handed his phone to Emily. "If you hear anything weird, call for help." "There's no service out here," Jess muttered, looking nervously around. Mark headed into the hallway, and the air in the cabin grew impossibly still. Emily and Jess exchanged a glance, neither later of them saying a word, both of them now keenly aware of how alone they were. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the room. Suddenly, the dragging noise returned louder this time, closer. It was coming from the hallway. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She could hear Mark's footsteps, but they sounded uneven, like he was struggling with something. "Mark?" Jess called out, her voice trembling. Mark appeared at the edge of the hallway, his face pale and sweaty. His hands were empty, the poker was gone. He took one unsteady step into the room, and they saw why his leg was soaked in blood, a long, jagged cut trailing down his shin. "Something's in here," he gasped, collapsing into a chair. "It's not," he winced in pain, clutching his leg. "It's not an animal." Emily rushed over, trying to stop the bleeding. Jess grabbed a towel from her bag, pressing it against the wound. "What happened?" Emily demanded, her voice barely steady. I found Tom. He was Mark's face twisted in fear. He was just standing there staring at the wall. I called his name, but he didn't respond. When I touched him, he turned around, but it wasn't him. His eyes, they were wrong. Black like he wasn't there anymore. And then something moved in the shadows. I couldn't see it, but it was big, to an unnatural grin. "Tom?" Emily asked, her voice small. He didn't respond. He stepped forward, and the air in the cabin grew colder. The fire flickered, nearly going out. As Tom moved closer, Emily saw something behind him. A shadow, darker than the night outside, shifting unnaturally. It moved with him, its edges frayed and swirling, like it was barely holding its shape. "Time to go," Tom said, his voice hollow, and suddenly the shadow lunged. Emily and Jess screamed, pulling Mark with them as they mashed through the door and into the cold night air. They didn't stop running until they reached the car, Jess fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking violently. The moment the car roared to life, they sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back at the cabin. Hours later, they reached the nearest town, battered and terrified. No one believed their story, and when they sent search parties to the cabin, they found it empty. No sign of Tom, no sign of struggle. But Emily knew what she saw, and she knew deep in her bones that whatever lived in that cabin, the cabin was still there, waiting for the next group of campers to stumble upon it.